Thank you so much for having me, Cindy. It's great to be here at PSS. We're going to be talking about the title of this presentation, A Caregiver's Guide to Communication and Behavior Issues. It's a mouthful, but hopefully as we go on, we'll be able to describe exactly what we're talking about. And if you have any questions, like Cindy said, just go ahead and type it in. We'll be answering questions toward the end. And feel free to click on or write in your questions, and we'll get to them in about a half an hour. Okay, so let's dive in. When we talk about, what we're going to do, we're going to talk about the behaviors of people living with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. And some of these behaviors can be problematic. So we're going to talk about these behaviors, what some of them might be. And then we're also going to be talking about the causes of the behaviors. And of course, we're going to have some solutions for you as well. Some of those solutions is learning how to talk in a way that the person with Alzheimer's can understand you better, and you'll be getting more results. So we'll start off with behaviors, and then we'll go into communication. And hopefully you'll learn something. So let's dive in. When we talk about types of behaviors, it's a full range of behaviors that we're talking about. Most of these behaviors tend to happen toward the mid and later stages of the disease. And the behaviors could be anywhere from noticing that your loved one has become more withdrawn. They might become more physically or verbally aggressive. They might even start to curse at times when they've never cursed before. They might just be agitated, always fidgeting and maybe repeating their sentences or actions over and over again. They also might be argumentative, combative, and at times they might put themselves in danger by going outside without anybody helping them, trying to leave where they are turning on a stove and not being clear about how to use the stove anymore. So these behaviors are really important to get a hold on, because these are behaviors that are associated with people with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. These are not behaviors that are born out of the need for your loved ones to trick you or to confuse you or to make you angry. It may seem like, who would ever think that? But if you're one of these people, if you're a caregiver that's constantly caring for someone with Alzheimer's, and you may be doing this task by yourself, you may be very befuddled by what you're seeing. By seeing these behaviors, you may not know what to think, and you may find that you're at a loss for solutions to these issues. Of course, some of these issues, there may not be exactly solutions to the issues, but we may be able to minimize the behaviors or reduce the occurrence of behaviors. And both of those can be very, very helpful when you're talking about caring for someone 24 hours a day. When we talk about behavior issues, it's really good to understand one thing, that people with Alzheimer's, when their needs aren't met, the amount of behavior issues actually increase. I want to repeat what I just said. When people with Alzheimer's have needs that go unmet, the level of behavior issues may start to increase. So let's dive down a little bit deeper into that. When somebody that has Alzheimer's, when their needs aren't being met, if they're hungry and unable to express that, and unable to identify what the issue is, you may find that they become more aggressive or more agitated. And they may not be able to tell you clearly what the issue is. So because of that, we need to really start to become really observant about the needs of the caregivers. Sometimes people with Alzheimer's might be trying to meet their own needs, but they're having issues with that. They're having troubles because they're having problems with thinking. They may start to undress in the middle of the living room. And for someone that may not know very much about Alzheimer's, they may think this is really crazy behavior. And of course, it's not normal behavior. But basically, what the person with Alzheimer's might be trying to do is go to the bathroom because they need to go to the bathroom. But they've been confused about where they are and the process that they need to take to get to the bathroom and use the bathroom properly. So there may be a little bit of method to what they're doing. So we need to check that out. If they become agitated, look at it and look at what they're doing, and maybe you'll be able to identify what their needs are. And if you can verbalize that in a simple way, that's not judging, or too confusing, you might be able to help them out quite a bit. So if they're undressing because they need to use the bathroom and they're in the middle of the living room and there's a bunch of people around, you might go up to them and get really close and say, hey, maybe let's go to the bathroom. Maybe you need time in the bathroom. And they may be able to follow you in that way. So that can be helpful. The last is making sure that, as people have this disease, they might be trying to communicate that they have some sort of need, right? And they might start to shout. So if I have somebody living with Alzheimer's and they have, let's say, a sore arm that no one's noticed that they're in pain, right? I may not be able to express clearly, hey, I've got pain in my arm. Please check this out and get this taken care of. Instead, they may start to yell and scream and become agitated because they don't know what else to do, because they're uncomfortable. So if they have this discomfort, they're more than likely going to have more behavior issues, right? So I hope you're getting the idea of what we're talking about. We really need to be a lot more proactive, and it's a big task for somebody living with somebody with Alzheimer's. I worked in nursing homes for years, and what I found is that when I met their needs ahead of time, we had less behavior issues going forward. So if I was doing an activity with them, at the beginning of the activity, I might say, hey, maybe you need to use the restroom. Let's go and use the restroom. Or did you have, what you have for lunch today? And really try to investigate how they're doing in the moment before I start any sort of activity with them. And this is an ongoing process of checking in with them to make sure that they're okay. And even if they're saying, I'm okay, you may need to take a look closer to see if there's any other problems. So some of the causes of behavior issues, when we're talking about unmet needs, is physical discomfort, like we've talked about. They might be hungry, they might be in pain, and it may be medication side effects. So that's really important to keep in mind. All of these physical discomforts, if they're not being met, if they're not being identified and corrected, may lead to increased behavior issues later on. And also the disease itself, as the disease progresses, they might have more delusions, more confusion, and more misunderstandings in general. And as a result, we need to find out what these new behaviors are. Alzheimer's is a progressive disease, and unfortunately at this point there's no cure for Alzheimer's. So what we're left with is trying to make sure that we give the person we love the best quality of life. And unfortunately, very often it's one person doing all these, taking care of all these needs. So it's quite a handful for one person to handle. So keep in mind, physical discomfort can be a really easy way for the person to be uncomfortable and start to have more behavior issues. They may also be having problems with their environment that they're not really able to express to you. So it comes around Thanksgiving. You're thinking, I'm going to bring the whole family in because I want this person to know, I want my father, my mother to know that all these people care about them, care about him. So let's bring them in. We'll have a beautiful meal and everything's going to be just like it was in years before. The problem is the person with Alzheimer's has changed and their environment may be a trigger for them. So what I mean by that is too much noise will make it harder for them to process information. It may be that they become confused and they feel alone in a room full of crowded people. They may hear too many people talking at once. And because of that, they become agitated because they don't know how to think clearly with so much going on. So the environment can be very important. When I worked in nursing homes, sometimes my staff would call me up and they'd say, Mr. Smith is having a lot of issues. He's cursing at everyone. We don't know what happened, but he's cursing a lot and he's starting to get combative. Can you come up and see what you can do? 9 times out of 10, I would get to the room and I would see my staff desperately trying to calm that person down. But I would always notice that the TV was on loud and they hadn't turned off the TV, right? So when you're trying to de-escalate these problems in environment, the first thing you might want to do is get them out of these crowded areas, these noisy areas. So very often I turn off the TV and immediately things would calm down a little bit. Sometimes I would ask the other clients to leave that area. Sometimes I'd ask the staff to leave too. And that would help. It would help the person that has Alzheimer's be able to think a little bit more clearly and perhaps lower their level of agitation and combativeness. And with that, I might be able to figure out what's going on with them, whether they need some sort of need that they haven't been able to express. And so when we think of needs, when we think of issues like this, behavior issues, the knee-jerk reaction is to stop these behavior issues. But what I'm saying is it's really important as we look at these behavior issues to kind of look under the hood to see what's driving these behavior issues. It may be emotions, it may be physical discomfort, it may be in the environment. All of these things can trigger the person to have more behavior issues, more discomfort, agitation, being angry, argumentative. All of these things can be triggered by having unmet needs. I mentioned emotional issues. Part of emotional needs means the relationships they have in their life. And very often we're talking about the caregivers. So if they're feeling that the caregiver isn't listening to them, if the caregiver only meets their needs and doesn't talk to them very much because they're so busy, they may feel lonely, they may feel bored, scared, mad, and sad. And if they're not being heard about their emotions, that might be a trigger as well. They may start to feel like, well, no one's listening to my sadness. I have sadness, and maybe if I scream a little bit more, that will help. Of course, I'm breaking it down in a way that would kind of make logical sense, but for the person with Alzheimer's in the mid to late stages, they're not always a fan of logic. They're having troubles with thinking, they're having troubles with memory, they're having troubles with mood swings and personality issues, and eventually, during the late stages, they may have trouble with physical functioning. So all of these things, can be very emotional for the person with Alzheimer's. And when that person tells you they have an emotion, even if their thinking is wrong, my suggestion to you would be to listen to them first. Really make sure that they know that they're being heard first. And then we can take it step by step. Because when they're not being heard about their emotional states, when they feel like they don't have anywhere to, start, but anywhere to go to actually communicate their emotions, and you might have to identify those emotions. They may not be able to tell you that they're angry. You might have to say, hey, looks like you're a little upset. Is there anything I can do to help you? And they may be confused in what they ask you to do. They may want to leave the place where they are. And the first step in changing these behaviors is to try to listen to what's going on with them. And of course, by listening, it may be observing that they're having anger when they're doing a certain behavior issue, observing that they're sad or lonely before their behavior issue comes up, right? So causes of behavior, physical discomfort, environment, emotional issues like relationships or other mad, sad, glad type of feelings, and all of these being heard by the caregiver is really important. So when we talk about behavior issues, when we talk about preventing behavior issues, what we're talking about is meeting the needs of the person, being proactive, and instead of thinking of ways to stop that behavior. I'll give you a clear example. In nursing homes, we had this person named Mr. Thomas, and he would sit outside the day room each day and by the nurse's station because he was having behavior issues of screaming and yelling. And each day he tried to get up and he needed a walker, and sometimes he might slip a little bit. And each day the nurse would say, have a seat, please, Mr. Thomas, please have a seat, have a seat. And each day he would start screaming that he didn't want to sit down, and there became an argument over there each day. So the nurse, trying to help the situation as quickly as she can, she started offering him a cookie. Here, have a cookie. Well, the first day it worked out okay. He got distracted and ate the cookie. But the next day, the cookies weren't working. And then we had a meeting about him. Anytime there was issues with clients, we'd sit down and have a meeting with the entire staff, try to figure out what we could do for that person. And what we discovered is he never got up out of his chair until 2 o'clock. And that's when the activities were going on. And he had been taken out of activities because, an activity program like bingo, something like that, or arts and crafts, he was taken out once because he was becoming aggressive. He would become verbally aggressive, and it was upsetting to other people, so we took him out of that. But what we created was a scenario that the person's, Mr. Thomas's, needs were not being met. He enjoyed being with other people. He enjoyed the activities, but he didn't know how to express that to anyone. So he would stand up thinking about those activities in the day room, but he didn't quite know how to get to the day room and get back in that group. So by observing his behavior, instead of just giving him a cookie that really didn't solve the problem very well, we actually got him into that day room again. And lo and behold, at 2 o'clock, when he was in an activity, getting some emotional needs met, the behavior stopped. He no longer needed to stand up and scream and become combative. He was in that room with other people. Now, occasionally, he might get a little aggressive, and emotionally aggressive, we'd have to take them out for a little while. But we didn't have to remove them from the group permanently. So keep that in mind. It can be very helpful to understand that people with Alzheimer's have emotional lives. Even though their thinking may become distorted, they do have emotional lives and they have emotional needs as well. So preventing behaviors by meeting the person with Alzheimer's needs can be very helpful, as opposed to just trying to stop the behavior after it happens. So I told you before, we're going to talk a little bit about communicating with somebody with Alzheimer's, because this is one of the ways that you'll actually find can be very helpful in meeting that person's needs. If they feel like they can really talk to you, and they can understand that you understand what they're saying and validate what they say, they're going to feel a lot better about their lives in general, and their behaviors, good chance, they may start to be reduced or eliminated altogether. So these communication techniques, too often I hear from family members, I know how to talk to my mother. I've been talking to her. We have had a great relationship all my life with my mother, and we always got along. So I don't think I really need any help talking to my mother, but thank you very much. And I would say that as this disease progresses and their abilities begin to change, not only their abilities, but their ability to communicate changes and becomes less, their communication becomes impaired, and their moods become a little bit more wild. What do I mean by wild? Their moods become a little bit more unstable. In other words, I'll give you another example. I'm in the nursing home, and Mrs. Smith is sitting down in the chair. She's a lovely person, and I notice that she's a little crooked in her chair, so I come up behind her and I say, "Hi, Ms. Smith, I'm going to move your chair a little bit because you're a little bit crooked." And I don't think she really understood what I meant, and so when I moved the chair a little bit, the chair jerked a little bit, and Ms. Smith started cursing at me. Now, I'd known Ms. Smith for years, and she had never cursed at me before. But what I realized was that she was surprised and startled and scared, and she didn't know how to express that. So her mood changed from being pleasant to becoming very angry and cursing at me in a second, right? So all of these things, the disease changes the personality, it changes their abilities. So we do need, as caregivers, to have some communication techniques that might help them, might help us communicate with the person a little bit better. So the first thing that I want to talk about is your own demeanor. Before you start talking to the person with Alzheimer's, check yourself. Very often caregivers can be very stressed out. They've got a lot of work on their plate, and sometimes they may show in their facial expressions or in their body language that they're a little frustrated, and they when the person with Alzheimer's sees that, they may not understand it doesn't have anything to do with them. They may feel like upset that the person is looking so angry and frustrated. Recognize that the person with Alzheimer's may not be able to communicate or understand language very well at various points, so they may not be able to understand what the situation is. So check yourself, try to relax before you talk with a person with Alzheimer's. Calm yourself down so that when you're speaking to them, you're speaking in a calm, slow, pleasant manner, warm. Think warm, being warm, and avoid, when you're speaking to someone, remember that environment. Try to turn off the TV, the other noises in the room, so that they're not distracted when you're talking to them. you'll have a lot better chances of communicating what you need to with them, and also listening to what they have to say, because they may be more willing to speak to you when you're calm and you take things slowly so they can understand you, and you're pleasant and warm and all of these things. Now, very often family members are like that with a person with Alzheimer's until there's a behavior issue that might put them in harm's way or become very uncomfortable for the family in general. And that's when their demeanor changes to a more serious, kind of a task-oriented, let's get this person out of this behavior quickly. But the person with Alzheimer's still continues to look at the person's emotional expressions. And when they see that they're upset, you might actually be creating a scenario where the behaviors increase, they get worse, right? So if you approach the person, even when you're concerned, in a calm, slow, pleasant way, and tell them what you want them to do rather than to stop doing what they're doing, you can have better successes with that. Keep your sentences short. That can be a really good way of making sure that you're understood. So I'll give you a quick scenario. I've got a few more minutes. Let's say my father has Alzheimer's, and I go into the living room and I tell my dad, he's watching TV, and I yell from across the room. I say, "Hey, Dad, I'm cooking your favorite steak. It's going to be ready in a few minutes. I just need to make the vegetables and then we'll be ready to go. Why don't you go ahead and use the bathroom, wash up your hands, come on in, we'll have a great meal," right? So, to the casual observer, that might seem like a pretty loving son, right? But when I go back 5 minutes later, my dad is still watching TV. He hasn't moved from that place. Now I'm getting a little upset because the meal behind me is starting to get cold. The food's not going to work if he doesn't hurry up and get to the dining room, right? So now I'm going to give you another scenario, right? I'm going to give you another scenario. Oh, and so of course when I'm upset, I'm showing that to my father, and I'm saying, "Don't you remember what I told you? The food's getting cold. Come on, let's hurry up. Let's get into the kitchen, so the dining room, so we can eat our meal," right? So now I'm going to show you another scenario, and hopefully by contrast you'll see what I'm doing. So next time the meal's ready, I'm thinking that last time didn't work out well at all. So this time I go into the living room, I sit next to my father, and I say, "Hey, how's it going?" And he looks at me and he goes, "It's going okay." And then I think, I'm getting a little hungry. And I rub my stomach. I said, "Do you want to go eat?" And he says, "Yes, sure, okay." And I said, "Why don't you follow me?" Right? So if you notice, most of those sentences were 5 words or less. For people that like to talk a lot, you may have to really change a lot of how you talk to somebody with Alzheimer's. I know my mother, who's from Colombia, she used to like to talk a lot. Unfortunately, that wouldn't work very well with somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia. So keep those sentences to short bits of information, and be checking in with that person to see if they're understanding you. And don't overwhelm them with too many facts, too many words. And in that way, you'll have a better chance. Also, keep in mind what I did. If I ask my father if he's hungry, he might just automatically say no, right? Because you're not picking up on the cues that his stomach is growling a little bit. So when I sat down next to him, I modeled the behavior that I was looking for him to do, which means that I started rubbing my stomach a little bit, and then I said, "I'm hungry. Let's go get something to eat," right? Instead of asking him, this is toward the mid and later stages, whether he's hungry. If he's always hungry, and that's not a problem for you. But if you're having somebody that is not often hungry, You may model behavior of being hungry yourself and then ask him just to accompany you to the dining room. Once you're there and they see the food, that might trigger a little bit more appetite and they might start eating automatically. So I'm sitting next to him, I rub my stomach, I'm getting him to move, and then I'm leading him to where I want him to go. This is in the mid stage to later stage. This can be very effective. So don't overwhelm them with their information, and don't assume that they're going to be able to remember even 5 minutes later what you told them, right? Be a companion to that person that you're caring for. Don't be a sheriff. Don't be a teacher, right? Don't be an authority figure. Try to make sure that your demeanor is a warm, friendly, that you're slowly giving them information. Remember, facial expressions and body languages can be very important. I know my sisters used to tell me, I'd be talking to them about something, and they'd look at me and they'd say, looks like you're angry. And I'd say, what are you talking about? And they said, we can tell when you're angry because your furrowed brow gives you away. I was kind of scrunch up my eyes a little bit, and I'd be saying, I'm not angry. Why do you think I'm angry, right? So your expressions can give you away very easily. So check those expressions at the door. Doesn't mean that you can't have those feelings of anger and frustration, because caregiving can be a really hard job. Just don't let the person with Alzheimer's see that, because they're going to misinterpret that. Okay, so what I'm saying is they may not be able to understand your words very well, but they do understand very often your emotional temperature. So make sure that you keep that in check as you talk to them. Facial and body language can also be used as a way to encourage them to follow your lead. It also can help them understand what you're trying to do, right? By rubbing your stomach or by pointing to the dining room. Let's go over here and eat. Then you're giving them a clear way of following you and understanding you. So the last things I'll say is make sure that you're very patient and wait for the responses. Don't put words in their mouth right away. Give them a chance to have that sense of autonomy so they can express themselves. It's really important. Make sure that you offer praise to them as well. What I often did is I would randomly tell the clients I was working with, I'd say, hey, Miss Smith, I'm really glad you're here right now. I'm having a really nice time with you. I'm so glad you came down. I like that every day we're here together. It makes me feel really good to have you here. I started doing that more and more because I was trained in the ways of being a good professional caregiver by a lot of people that were much more wise than I was early in my years. And because of that training, I had a lot of people with Alzheimer's. I worked in a large institution, and very often when the people looked at me, they wanted to talk to me. And that's a sign that people were really trusting me and feeling like they could have a conversation with me. Praise them, say you're sorry, even if you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people might have an issue. Well, I didn't want to come down today, but you told me that I should come down, And even though that wasn't exactly what happened, I asked them. I wouldn't argue with them. Don't bother arguing with them because you won't be able to win an argument with somebody with Alzheimer's. It's usually 5 minutes later, they're not going to remember that argument, and they're still going to be asking you the same type of questions. So say you're sorry if you need to. Don't let your ego be involved. Sometimes people think, well, I'm not going to say I'm sorry unless I did something wrong. Well, the reality is you can say sorry to somebody with Alzheimer's because you're sorry they're having a difficult time, right? So I find that praising people, being patient with them, saying you're sorry, being an active listener which means that as they talk, I become more animated. I use my facial and physical, my body to listen to what they're saying. I'm nodding my head and I'm saying, I understand what you're saying, right? And I might rephrase what they're saying so they feel like I'm really communicating with them better. All of these things, being able to, being able to have all these tools in your belt can really make these issues that come up, behavior issues, they can actually lessen these behavior issues. And you might find that your job as caregiver might become a little bit easier. There's a lot more information about behavior issues for each particular behaviors, but we're not going to get into that today. Perhaps in another time, we can talk about these issues in detail. But I wanted to open up right now, and if you have any questions or concerns, so we can answer your questions about communicating and behaviors of somebody with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. Are there any questions today?
Roy, thank you so much for that comprehensive overview. And for our guests, feel free to type in your questions in the chat box, and we look forward to answering them. And while we're waiting, I wanted to ask you, Roy, is there a checklist that we can, the caregivers could go through to ascertain what exactly is causing them discomfort? So like a checklist for probing questions, you know, like whether it relates to physical discomfort, whether they're hungry or thirsty or in pain, or their medication isn't working as it should, or they're like crafted questions, you know, 5 words or less, that we could just drill down and
Right,
ask.
right. There's a lot of great information on the Alzheimer's Association website. If you're looking for really clear information, just Google this type of topic, behaviors and communication, and you can get great information from the Alzheimer's Association website. It might have a checklist for you, but what I would say today, the first step is observing what the person is doing. Right, observing if they're doing anything like rubbing their shoulder, that might mean something, right? Don't wait for them to tell you that they're having an issue. Look at them. If you see that there's a little bead of sweat coming down, and even though they've said to you, no, I'm fine, no, I'm fine, that might be a time where you might say, you know what, I think I'm gonna take off. Ooh, it's getting kind of hot. Let me take off that sweater for you. Would that be all right, right? So you have to kind of, sometimes just saying, how are you doing, is not gonna do the trick. You really have to be observant about their physical body and their emotional temperature. If you see that they're agitated, maybe it's time to turn off the music or the TV. If you see that they're agitated, maybe it's time to really try to have a slow, patient talk with them to find out what's going on with them. Too often, people with Alzheimer's see a lot of this. No, please don't do that. No, you're wrong. You shouldn't be sad. You shouldn't want to leave here, right? And if the sound was off and you saw somebody doing this to you all day long, would you think that they were a caring, loving person, right? Probably not. Now, the people that are caring for people with Alzheimer's, they need to get that communication skills down because it may not become natural to them until they have more information like we're talking about. But I'd love to be able to come back at another time and talk about these behavior issues and really get into the nitty-gritty about clear ways of stopping behaviors. For instance, when somebody is agitated and they're repeating themselves questions to you all day long, and it's getting frustrated to you. Sometimes just getting them involved in an activity might do the trick. People with Alzheimer's have a hard time multitasking. So if you give them another activity, as opposed to telling them, please be quiet, don't worry, I've told you that information already, right? Give them another activity. That way they're involved in one activity and they're not involved in the activity that might be problematic for you. Also recognize that these behaviors are on a scale. Visualize the scale. Over here is something that may be irritating you, causing you discomfort, but is not any danger for them at all. And over here, they're walking out into traffic. It's a danger, right? So very often people with Alzheimer's, they might pick up tissues and tear them up. Ask yourself if you really need to stop them from doing that, right? Maybe that's an activity they can do. Maybe they're maintaining their own level of agitation by tearing up newspapers, tearing up tissues, whatever the case may be.
Roy, thank you. That I really loved your key points on observing what the person is doing, because I find that a lot of times we tend to go into this robotic, oh, this person needs to eat, or they have to go to some sort of schedule throughout the day, that we lose sight that they might not want to do this even though it's 2 o'clock and they have an appointment, let's say, right?
That's so true.
To be present in the moment.
It's very true. And what's odd is, like, part of what makes a caregiver really good is their ability to multitask, to plan ahead, right? To be able to use your brains a lot, problem solve. And all of these things is what makes it very hard for that caregiver to talk successfully to the person that they're caring for. So even though they might have a lot of skills, right? When it comes to talking to the person with Alzheimer's, be in that moment. Don't be ahead of yourself, right? Pardon me. And that can be very, very helpful. Be in the moment, be patient with a person. Don't try to add too much information to what you're talking to them about, right? And give them patience so they can understand, so you can understand better what's going on with them. They may give you an answer. It may take them several times to give you an answer, but allowing them to answer you will give them a sense of control over their own destiny. And that's really important. Yeah. Any other questions?
Hi, everyone. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. And I could also follow up with everyone afterwards. If they have any specific questions, I could certainly send them to Roy afterwards. So for everyone on this call, thank you so much for joining us today. And please also join us again next Wednesday, July 15th at 11 o'clock for Self-Care for the Caregiver. And Roy, would you like to give us a teaser on what to expect?
Sure, of course. First of all, to all of you caregivers out there, I want to thank you. Thank you for all the work you do, because it's really hard work. Very often it's isolating work. Very often you're left to your own devices. You often don't feel like you're doing a very good job toward the later stages of the disease. That's what research shows. So taking care of yourself can be a great way of making sure that you're healthy and well throughout the process of caring for somebody else. When you care for someone, very often you stop caring for yourself as well. You delay your own medical appointments so you can take care of that person with Alzheimer's. And that can be devastating because, first of all, we want to make sure that caregivers are okay, because we're finding more and more, the research shows that caregivers are at risk. They're at risk for getting sick. And the reason why they're getting sick is because they're overwhelmed with work, they have high levels of stress, and they're not taking care of themselves because they're too busy with the tremendous job of taking care of their loved ones who have Alzheimer's. So tune in next week, and I'm going to give you clear ideas of ways of taking care of yourself. And incidentally, when you take care of yourself, you're going to become a better caregiver. Too often, it's the caregiver that gets burned out of caregiving long before the person with Alzheimer's needs to go into any sort of assisted care type of situation. So taking care of yourself will allow you to stay at home and help your loved one longer. I know that very often people don't want to put their loved ones into institutions. They want to care for them at home. The first step is being able to have self-care as part of your daily activity so you can make it through each day.
Great. Thank you so much, Roy. And I hope to see everyone next Wednesday, July 15th at 11 o'clock for self-care for the caregiver. And everyone have a rest of a wonderful week, and see you back here next Wednesday. Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Thank you.